Open your mouth right now and think about your teeth for a second. Odds are pretty good at least one of them has a filling, or has been drilled, or is currently sending you a very specific kind of pain signal that means a dentist visit is overdue. That's normal for you. That was not normal for most of human history. Dig up the skull of someone who lived 20,000 years ago, and in a huge number of cases, you'll find a full set of teeth that are worn down, sure, but almost completely free of cavities. No drilling, no fillings, no root canals, just teeth that lasted an entire lifetime with essentially no dental care whatsoever. So here's the question worth actually sitting with. How did people with no toothbrushes, no dentists, no fluoride, and definitely no idea that bacteria even existed end up with better dental health than most modern humans manage with an electric toothbrush and a drawer full of floss? The answer isn't that ancient humans were biologically superior. It's not that their genetics were somehow better suited to fighting decay. The answer is almost entirely about what they were and weren't putting in their mouths. And once you understand it, you're going to look at your own diet a little differently.
Let's start with what actually causes a cavity, because this is where the whole story begins. Cavities happen because bacteria living in your mouth feed on sugars and starches, and as they digest that food, they produce acid as a byproduct. That acid slowly eats away at the hard enamel coating your teeth. Do this often enough, with enough sugar available, and eventually that acid breaks all the way through, creating a cavity. It's a completely mechanical process. No sugar or starch for the bacteria to feed on, dramatically less acid. Dramatically less decay. It really is that simple at the core of it. Now here's where it gets interesting. For the overwhelming majority of human history, before agriculture existed, humans were what we call hunter-gatherers, and their diet looked almost nothing like ours. Meat, fish, nuts, roots, wild vegetables, some fruit, seasonally, when it was actually available. What's almost completely absent from that list? Concentrated sugar and refined starch, the exact fuel source cavity-causing bacteria need to thrive. Ancient humans weren't eating a low-sugar diet because they were disciplined or health-conscious. They were eating a low-sugar diet because refined sugar, as we understand it today, simply did not exist yet. You cannot have a cavity epidemic without a steady supply of the thing that causes cavities. And for most of human history, that thing just wasn't available in any meaningful quantity.
This is backed up by an enormous amount of archaeological evidence. Studies looking at skeletal remains from pre-agricultural hunter-gatherer populations consistently find cavity rates that are shockingly low by modern standards, often in the range of 1 to 5% of teeth affected. Compare that to modern industrialized populations, where cavity rates can affect the vast majority of adults at some point in their lives. Same species, same basic tooth structure, wildly different outcomes, and diet is the single biggest variable separating the two. But here's where the story gets a genuinely fascinating twist, because it's not actually a straight line from ancient humans having perfect teeth to modern humans having bad teeth. Something happened in between that made things noticeably worse, and it happened long before modern candy or soda ever existed. The dawn of agriculture. Around 10,000 years ago, when humans started domesticating grains like wheat and barley, something shifted in the archaeological record, and it shows up directly in people's teeth. Skeletal populations from early agricultural societies show a measurable spike in cavity rates compared to the hunter-gatherer populations that came before them. Why? Because grains, once processed and eaten regularly, break down into exactly the kind of fermentable starches that cavity-causing bacteria love. Early farming communities weren't eating sugar the way we think of it today, but they were eating a diet suddenly much heavier in starchy, carbohydrate-dense food, milled grain, porridge, early forms of bread, and their teeth paid the price almost immediately in evolutionary terms. This actually reveals something important about the whole story. It's not really about sugar specifically, it's about fermentable carbohydrates in general. Anything bacteria can break down into acid.
Sugar just happens to be the most extreme, most concentrated version of that problem, which is exactly why the real explosion in cavities we see historically doesn't come from agriculture alone. It comes later, when concentrated, refined sugar enters the picture at scale.
For most of human history, even after agriculture, sugar in any concentrated form was rare and expensive. Honey existed, but it was seasonal, difficult to harvest, and not a daily staple for most people. Refined sugar, the kind that ends up in candy, soda, and processed food today, didn't become widely available to ordinary people until sugar plantations scaled up dramatically, starting around the 16 and 1700s, and even then, it remained a luxury item for a long time. Once sugar production scaled up and prices dropped, cavity rates in historical populations climbed dramatically, and the timeline lines up almost perfectly. More available sugar, more cavities, tracked across centuries of dental remains with remarkable consistency. Now, diet alone doesn't fully explain the whole picture, because there's a second factor that mattered just as much, and it's one almost nobody thinks about: chewing. Ancient diets required an enormous amount of physical chewing effort compared to modern food. Tough meat, fibrous plants, unprocessed grains that hadn't been ground into fine flour. All of that heavy mechanical chewing did something modern, soft, processed food doesn't do nearly as well. It stimulated saliva production dramatically, and saliva is genuinely one of your mouth's best natural defenses against cavities. Saliva helps neutralize the acid bacteria produce, and it physically washes food particles away from the surface of your teeth before bacteria have much time to feed on them at all.
Modern processed food, by contrast, tends to be softer, easier to chew, and stickier, which means it clings to tooth surfaces for longer and requires far less saliva production to actually eat. You're not just eating more sugar today. You're also, in a very literal sense, chewing your food less effectively for keeping your mouth clean in the process. There's a third piece to this puzzle too, and it's genuinely one of the more surprising parts of the story. Ancient humans, despite having no toothbrushes in the modern sense, were not doing nothing for their teeth. Archaeological evidence shows humans have been cleaning their teeth in some form for an extraordinarily long time. Researchers have found fossilized tooth grooves on ancient hominid teeth dating back over 1.5 million years, worn patterns consistent with using thin sticks or grass stalks to physically pick and clean between teeth. Fibrous plant material, in some cultures, was chewed specifically to help clean tooth surfaces, functioning almost like an early crude toothbrush. Some ancient cultures also used natural abrasives, certain plants, charcoal, or crushed shell, mixed with saliva and rubbed against teeth in a practice that functioned remarkably similarly to modern toothpaste, just without the minty flavor or the marketing campaign.
This wasn't universal, and it definitely wasn't as effective as modern dental care, but it does mean the popular image of ancient humans doing absolutely nothing for their teeth is at least partly a myth. People noticed food stuck between their teeth felt uncomfortable, found something that helped remove it, and kept doing it, generation after generation, long before anyone understood bacteria existed at all. Let's be fair here, though, because this story isn't entirely a triumphant one, and it would be dishonest to pretend ancient dental health was flawless. Cavities weren't the primary tooth problem ancient humans faced, but other issues absolutely were. Extreme tooth wear was almost universal, caused by gritty, unprocessed food, and in some cultures, sand or grit that got mixed into ground grain during processing. Teeth were often worn down dramatically by middle age, sometimes worn all the way to the root in severe cases. Abscesses, painful infections at the root of a tooth, were common, and without modern dentistry could be genuinely life-threatening if the infection spread. There was no anesthesia. There was no antibiotic treatment. A bad tooth infection in the ancient world could, in the worst cases, actually kill you. So while ancient humans largely dodged the specific problem of cavities, they were absolutely not living some kind of pain-free dental utopia. They traded one set of dental problems for a different, and in some ways more dangerous, set of dental problems.
So what does all of this actually tell us? It tells us cavities aren't some unavoidable, inevitable part of being human.
They're largely a byproduct of a very specific and historically very recent set of dietary conditions, heavy and refined sugar and processed starch, combined with softer food that requires less chewing and produces less saliva. Ancient humans didn't have magically superior teeth. They simply weren't eating the specific things that caused the specific problem we now consider almost inevitable. And there's something worth sitting with in that. Modern dentistry is genuinely remarkable. Fluoride, regular cleanings, actual anesthesia, the ability to save a tooth that would have simply killed someone a few centuries ago, all of that represents real, undeniable progress. But it's also true that we've built an entire industry and an entire daily ritual, brushing, flossing, mouthwash, regular checkups, largely around managing a problem that our own modern diet actively creates and then keeps recreating every single day. Ancient humans weren't fighting a constant uphill battle against their own food. In a strange way, their environment simply wasn't handing them the problem in the first place.
So the next time you're standing at the sink, brushing your teeth before bed, take a second to think about what you're actually doing. You're not performing some ancient, timeless ritual passed down since the dawn of humanity. You're managing the direct consequences of a diet that would have been almost unrecognizable to a hunter-gatherer who lived 20,000 years ago. Someone who never once picked up a toothbrush, and whose teeth, in a lot of cases, still outlasted yours.